413, which is ironically can contrast to the actual date, which is 7/7/23, which if you do 7/7 into 23, that's three. You almost got a pi number, which is like 34314. So useless math for today. Anyways, I'm your host, Lauren Gray. Thank you so much for joining us today. Given the date and given the time frame and given all the things that are happening right now, today's topic is very specific to anything changed for you this week. It's a kind of a slightly rhetorical question, given we just came off of a huge cycle of association conferences. AHLA had theirs, HFTP had theirs, HSMA had theirs, ALHOA had theirs, not too much prior to that. So the mid-year conference wave the large conference wave has gone through. So I want to talk a little bit about what came out of that, what people's perceptions they share with me. I did not go to any of them this year, which is very unique. Usually because I have press credentials and so forth, I have the privilege of being able to go and attend everything and cover it on our TV station, which you might be watching us live on the Hospitality Channel TV station, which is located on Roku, Google, Amazon, Apple, Prime, and Samsung. But also simulcasted on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. So there we go. Selfless plug about where we're broadcasting from. But out of all that process, I usually get to attend and watch and review, and I get to take all the press releases, which will be showing up in content on our TV station for links and so forth. And I'm going to tackle the association efforts this year, conference-wise, mid-year conferences, in a little bit as I talk a little bit more about other things that are happening this week for us to consider as to what's changed for you. Obviously, very large entity of transactions conflict really between billionaires, which seems to be a topic regularly. And that is Zuckerberg has launched Threads, which is in direct contrast to the absurdly strange what's happening in the world of Twitter with Elon Musk. I think everyone was being patient with Elon in the sense they didn't have a viable option. If you had tried Mastodon, which was the first, well, where am I going to go if I don't use Twitter? And it's a decentralized and they don't collect data, which is actually a very important thing. And you have your own separate servers and so forth. The problem with any of that when it comes to usabilities is with Mastodon in comparison to Twitter, you can find based on content and topic and hashtags and so forth, the things we've become so familiar with Twitter as a platform. But Mastodon, you actually had to be connected via who you knew, which made it a little bit more challenging to discover and then join and follow and collaborate with. It was kind of were you popular enough to be added kind of thing, or were you creating something you wanted to add as many people as you could and you had to go find them. So it was an interesting addition. I'm not saying now throw it out the window now that Threads floating around, but it wasn't a full replacement to how people had become familiar using with Twitter. Twitter has gone through all these weird changes, and I'm sure by no accident or fluke when Elon Musk decided that he was now going to add one more layer of restrictions and controls of how many posts you get to actually have per day or see per day. That was just like, really? Now what? We're paying for fake IDs. We're paying for ability to use platforms. I think TweetDeck was going to be charged for. It's coming soon, or at least he was considering it. And then all of a sudden, Zuckerberg says, hey, we're going to go over and create something almost identical or at least similar to Twitter on our own platforms. Now, the brilliance of some of the things Zuckerberg has done, we'll talk about the positives with it first, is that he made it where it was tangibly connected to the audience already existing on Instagram, which is 10 times larger than the audience that is on Twitter. Twitter's had a perpetual and steady decline as to its use, just because of the chaos that Musk had, and also its malfunctions prior to Elon taking it over. So it was an easy fix for that, and it does give him some resistance to what Elon is now trying to do of saying, "Oh, I'm going to sue you because you duplicated and took proprietary stuff." Whatever, dude. So we're going to see iterations of Threads probably come through. Whether it lasts, well, we can always ask Google and how their Wave program worked. There's been many attempts at creating social networks. And we've actually covered on the live show several times. Was there any more room for another one? Is there another way of doing this that we're eagerly wanting to? I think most people, and I've been watching the newscast locally at the least, there's just a fatigue, like enough with social. Really, one more platform, I'm not even keeping up with it. Most of them make comments that, you know what, I've picked one and that's what I'm sticking with, or I don't even bother with it anymore. Because there is a overwhelming fatigue of the impact that social has created in our society. That's an opinion perspective, but that's not necessarily the real world perspective. People still want a soapbox to stand on. People still want to be able to know that they can go someplace and express their opinion, valid, insane, or crazy or not, and that there is somebody somewhere that's going to be able to see it outside of the person that might be walking by on the sidewalk when they do it. So the value proposition what social represents, and that is a forum for broadcasting, is still ever present. So that happened this week. The third thing that I wanted to bring up for this week, and we're going to get back to everything in different contexts, is the GA4. July 1st was the D day for Universal Analytics being transitioned permanently over to GA4. And I had a couple of shows, if you've been following us, obviously, hopefully so, that we were leading up to this. One was the entering it of the dark ages of some people. That was 2 weeks ago. And last week was it's the last day of the things the way it was. And yes, it has happened pretty much the way that it's understood. We have three categories of people. We have the people that pre-planned for this and already were prepared. And it was really just a matter of finally getting to tell people to stop using or looking at the UA data. Then you have people that were late to the game, but they still acted on it. And they're now dealing with the fact that they have gap points in their historical data that don't match numerically because of the method changes between Universal and GA4, which we've talked at great length about the show. And then you have those people that we expected, which were wait, what am I? Why is my things not showing up anymore? The oblivious to it kind of things, or the people that discounted it or kicked the can down the road saying, well, we'll worry about it when it becomes a problem. Well, it's a problem now. So those are the three large things that happened that I want to talk about in our Anything Changed for You this week discussion. And we'll get to news items too that were also very impactful based on the holiday travel and so forth, and the way that travelers are traveling right now. We'll get to that as well. So that's all today in the show. So first I want to get back to is the conferences. I am going to put this out on the podcast discussion today as well. I'm also going to put it out in our feedback loop, which is hdm.news/talkback, where you can leave me an auto recording and answer the question and then tell me permissions of how I can refer to your answer. I have been on a soapbox. This show actually was generated from the fervent belief that we give back to our industry, that we put back our learnings to the industry to help others. As the tide rises, all boats rise with it kind of mentality. And I've always been a critic of conferences that never provided usable content, that were vague, that were showcasing people to beat their chest and say how good they were, but without definitions to how they attained their greatness. I also was a very big critic of conferences that were really just infomercials that you paid the privilege to see. All the content from the stage was pretty much from people telling you why you wanted their product or use their product or the value of their product, and really not telling you ways to solve what their product did for you, or things that were insights that you could take to evaluate whether you had other decisions to make. And I've always been a critic of that for everyone. There's no one that excludes my criticism to this. All associations in my mind have fallen from the righteous path of true content usage. I think more so now than in past. As I said, I have not attended any of the conferences this year, so I'm speaking from a third-party perspective. But I do listen to all the people I talk to that have gone to these conferences this past week, or 2 weeks really. And I look for commonalities in what they discuss. The first and highest foremost thing is the value of networking by attendance is, and has always been there, whether we were pre-pandemic, when there's a certain resignation of like, well, I get to see people. That's great. Then there was a true and deep appreciation to being able to go back and see people when we were actually be able to go back to the first conferences after the pandemic, to now a appreciation because of what we went through that we still get to go over and see these people. And for a lot of people, the chance to see other people or certain people or a variety of people only happens at these conferences. This is their chance to come across them. One, either they're not client vendor related, or they're not peer related, or they're not company related. And this is a chance to talk to other people that you really don't have a reason to pick up the phone and call them. There's no reason for them to even answer the phone by you calling them, but you have a familiarization with them. And it's fun to see them and talk and share notes and talk and get caught up and hear things and begin to have a broader networking perspective of how things are going in the world of hospitality. That is first and foremost always a benefit of these conferences. And for right now, never taken away. We tried to see if we could augment it with virtual conferences. And given that was our only choice at the time through the pandemic lockdown, we were satisfied enough with it, but not totally satisfied. We put up with it. Then we went through a process of hybrid conferences. And I think that ability, that residual ability, remains under the context I'm about to talk about. Is it worth it? Because if you take out the networking value of going to these conferences and you look solely at the value of what the conference by content is giving, is it really worth the virtual connection? Because obviously, if you're in person, you get the networking. If you're not in person, you have to rely upon the value of the content of the conference. And that's where my contention begins to ride. It's not on any of them worth the cost of attending virtually for the content. Now, I say that with a caveat because there is a worth to attending virtually for not the content, but for other things. The content of these programs, as I've complained about over time, has been lacking in depth, lacking in quality, lacking in actionable items. Now, you can contest, and I will challenge anybody that's listening to the show to get back with me and give me a counter opinion. I'll put you on the show to give me a counter opinion. I will have this conversation with you on the show in the sense of talking to me about the other ways I'm looking at these conferences. That the content from the stage is often vague or opaque because you don't want to help your competition do what you're already doing better than they are. So you can talk about why there is a value to what you do, but you don't talk about how you created that value. That's a fair statement. You're right. I believe the opposite, which is if you learned it from me, I'm already ahead of you. So whatever you've learned from me, I'm already doing things better because I'm doing other things that you haven't done yet. There is also the aspect that I might be providing you a piece of a puzzle you've been missing, and now you are better than me because you had a larger model that you now had the solution I provided. Any which way, there is this mutual benefit of helping each other. And there is ways of helping people without giving them every step of the program, giving them the direction, giving them the guidance, giving them the starting point. These are all ways to improve somebody's actual items without necessarily then holding their hand through the entire step-by-step process, thereby creating a competition for you. So I dilute that argument against sharing actionable data from the stage. The second is I understand the mechanics and the finances of how conferences work, having built and run conferences online and helping pretty much all the associations from being on their boards and so forth over decades. I understand the mechanics, the logistics of conferences. And it's a very symbiotic creation. Sponsors, which are the driving force of the cost coverage, sponsor or give you money because of the audiences they were able to tap into, the attendees that you are soliciting to from via your association relationship membership with them and beyond, to put in front that they get to go over and talk and participate with. That necessary symbiotic relationship is a must. Unless you want to carry the financial note for a conference that has no sponsorships to it, which technically really, and I've done those too, can be online where, hey, this is a pure content conference. And the people that are presenting aren't here simply for the benefit of selling you whatever they're talking about. It's really about the content that they want to share. Those are very rare, and I've done those. And I can tell you the audience's participation truly appreciates it, but the audience size is fractional compared to the other conferences that exist. So from a monetization point of view, unless you want to be a philanthropist and constantly finance those conferences, that's really what you get. Is if you remove the money equation out of this, of sponsors and so forth, people paying to be there doesn't cover much more than just maybe some token efforts towards the cost of it. So you need these sponsors, and sponsors need to be given the opportunity to validate their investment into attendance of the conference or the sponsorship of the conference by getting in front of the attendees. Totally understand that logistics as well. I think the appeasement that I have to that is creative ways of getting booths or breakouts or things that allow them to showcase their product, I think are very valuable. And I think some associations over the past years had been doing well with that. It was a fuzzy line sometimes. Sometimes those sponsors wrote bigger checks and they all of a sudden found themselves on the bigger stage. But most of the time, there was a bit of a borderline as to what really got presented from keynotes and what got presented from main stage was valuable perspective, valuable information to the degree that it's not, as I said before, giving away the mechanics and logistics that help your competitors. I think through the lockdown and the pandemic and the precipice of insolvency that some of these associations had, because obviously part of their driving continuity, they make money off of these conferences, but they also make money off of membership. With the industry having been locked down, one of the first things that got struck off of any expense from a company and personally was memberships and dues. I can't go to these things. There's nothing, even if they gave me information I can do with these things. I thought it was very poor of some associations not to simply extend people's memberships through that hardship. They still require people to pay for membership each year, even though there was nothing they were providing really. They gave them some token stuff that was 6 or 12 months old data that could be found anywhere anyway. It wasn't worth the cost. And even some of the enhanced relationships some of these associations had of more influential gatherings that was a pay up for companies and so forth. There was no reimbursement. There was no compensation for the fact that the events that people paid to have been able to participate in got canceled. They just kept the money and said, "We're really sorry, but hey, it's the pandemic. There's nothing we can do. Pay your dues next year to try it again." And that put me in the boat with some of these associations where I stopped, where I just was like, wasn't worth the contributing. Now, that being said, we do this show and we do the podcast always in support of, in particular, HSMAI. Been doing it for 17 years, our podcast, where at the very end we say it's in support of HSMAI. And I still have to pay dues to be a part of it. Volunteerism. Anyways, the idea that the conferences, because of the pandemic and the fear of possibly having to dissolve the association or to bring it down, now makes them more money hungry, I think. Because, and this is what I'm getting from everybody that attended every conference that was out there these past few weeks, there was more main stage sales pitches than there was actual usable perspective or content. That everyone enjoyed the networking. Everyone enjoyed the exposure to new services and programs that are out there, or the new versions of softwares and programs that either they hadn't used or forgot about or whatever. Always that value of firsthand. But they really felt that pretty much everything that was coming from any stage was just a different version of a sales pitch. Again, I understand the logistics. You need sponsors to do the conference. You need to pay the bills for doing it all. It's huge money, because if you've never tried to organize one of these in person for these conference centers at scale of the size audience that they were trying to do, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. If you think it's expensive as a vendor in a booth to have to pay the money to be there, and also all of the AV requirements and so forth, and for instance, high tech is to me one of the higher markers. I mean, Focusrite is the highest marker of participation costs, but to get a TV is $1,000 at your booth that you have to get from them in the conference center because you can't bring your own, that kind of stuff. You can imagine the liquidity of the organizers having to pay for everything, the financial commitment to do that, and the solidified commitment to do that regardless of whether they get the attendance necessary or the sponsors necessary, they're still on the hook for the cost. The contract is a contract. So I understand the mechanics of all that. And it's very easy to soften your stance on the feather in your hat that you had a Google or an Amazon or Bing or any of them, a Meta on your stage, to warrant the attendance of everybody. But what I'm hearing a lot of times is from wherever these high level places were presenting, it was more about why you needed to use their products than it was about what you should do with the process of what their products provide. The value proposition is more about why it's important their product is their solution in comparison to anybody else's, perhaps. That's to be expected in some senses. If you're having somebody like a Google on stage, of course they're going to talk about themselves. Of course they're going to talk about their services. Of course they're going to talk about their products. But there is a definite difference between talking about what they do versus how it helps you. And I got the distinct impression from a variety of conferences that it was, most of the presentations were about what they could do for you, why you want to get from them. And this goes for other ones where there's management groups that are upfront, talking about why their management group is successfully better than other options you might be considering and so forth. Again, I might be fighting the wrong battle. I've always felt that that was a deterrent from conferences. I was the person that was standing up saying, "Give us the truth, give us the content, give us the actual items." And I might be fighting a battle that nobody wants won. I don't know whether the attendance of people at conferences is based on the fact that the expectation is of what I just discussed or complained about, that they get exposure to these products firsthand from the entities themselves, and that's the purpose of their visit, or whether or not the attendance is based on the fact that that's what's being put in front of everybody. So therefore, the only people that go are the people that are interested in hearing what those people have to say. I don't know, chicken or egg. I do know that it's not in the content value that is there as it is the context of how it's presented. So again, I would love people's insight as to how they see the differences. Whether, like Lauren, you're blowing smoke, don't need to. This is what conferences do. This is what I go to the conference for. I expect to be pitched. I expect to be shown products that I need to be interested in. I'm there for the very purpose of understanding, in comparison, firsthand, their best presentation of their product. Don't harp about what content did I get, what walkaways did I get. It's funny, people will answer surveys one way, but their expectations are another. If you were to survey people, persistently people want actual items. Persistent, they want takeaways. And yet they go to these conferences that are the antithesis of those requests. So I think, as you know, there's some interesting, fascinating articles actually on how people respond to surveys and polls and all that kind of stuff. They say one thing, but they really are not. It depends on the structure of the options that they have. It depends on the phrasing of the question. There's lots of dynamics to it. But the reality of it is, what people want isn't necessarily what they get, and what they get is more of what they didn't want. But they don't say it that way. Anyway, so that was one thing, is I didn't feel from anybody that I talked to, because I asked the following questions. What kind of data did you get from the conference? In the sense of, what did you learn that you didn't know before? There was a couple of things about large numbers as to users and or trends, generalized stuff that, to be honest with you, a simple search on Google, if you ask the question, would give you the same information. So nothing uniquely to the conference, nothing, thank God you paid to get that information, because if you didn't, you wouldn't get it. I asked if their techniques have changed. Are they going to fundamentally do something different from what they were exposed to at the conferences? Other than the suggestion of reevaluating some software programs or some services that are being offered, to see whether or not either they want to enhance their current relationship with them or change relationships to another vendor. There was nothing they themselves said, we're going to do this differently because this seems to make better sense for us to do this. Then I asked, did they consider, because we're coming up on budget season next month, right? Did they come up with new considerations for budget? Again, in the same context, other than the possibility of changing vendors of service programs, platforms, software costs, and so forth. Nobody's really talking about addressing long-term solutions to existing tech stack issues or modalities or anything that would be outside of just the acquisition of another platform or software. So I beg the question, for what purpose is the conference? If it's really just to understand what's out there and to compare softwares and to evaluate options, it's a raging success. And for that reason, the whole ecosystem of symbiotic relationship of vendors that are in sponsorship, attendees that are wanting to be exposed to the vendors, beautiful cycle. And I'm a fool for asking just to sit down and smile and wave my hand and ask fun questions from the front row when it seems intriguing. And to that end, maybe that's what it is. Or is there a viability to challenging that this is an ecosystem that has created its own self-fulfilling loop, and that we need to break that loop, at least intermittently, and offer different value propositions to the purpose of a conference? I put that challenge out, and I put that question out to anybody. So that's one thing from this week. The other, going back to the Thread platform for Facebook. We as marketers look at these platforms under the context of value relationship to what we provide our clients. Is this a player right now? I mean, it's great that Zucker's bragging that he has 50 million people that signed up in the first 4 hours and stuff like this, first 24 hours. And already people are looking at the terms and conditions, um, where they're wagging a finger at it that says, if I want to turn off Thread once I've signed it up, I have to literally turn off my Instagram as well. Well, yes. And I think people miss the mark that there are some things that were set up on purpose just for the very reasons that are happening right now, where the owner of Twitter, Mr. Musk, has a harder time proving that he was copycatted. That Zuckerberg basically was striking at a time that everyone was tolerating the idiocy of Twitter's random changes in how it handles stuff, and struck while they were weak. We applaud that in the movies. So we should be applauding Zuckerberg for his timing for that. And plus, he needed a win because he had been sucking wind so long for throwing billions away for pushing behind the VR metaverse, which I'm still a fan of its eventual usage. But he didn't get it over the hill, and so they lost a lot of money, lost a lot of reorganization, and so forth. Plus, not a big fan of his data acquisition platforms with Facebook. But there goes in some of the conversations about Thread. Thread is in that same ecosystem. They're in the same ecosystem of WeChat, of Instagram, of Facebook, and now it. And you can see this in plenty of posts, if you look at the disclaimers of how the app works, they're ripping all the data that they can under the fresh new monicum of it's not under all of the other data that we've been fighting on the restrictions and usabilities of. There's a whole new platform, and you're accepting all these terms on this new platform because you're blindly jumping into a new platform to see if it's interesting. And by so doing, you've automatically connected to an account that has high value to you, which might be your Instagram account. You don't want to jeopardize that. Now you're stuck in this one. And now you're giving away even more data because the data now says in the disclaimers that they can use other data. That's one of the reasons why it didn't show up in Europe, because the guidelines don't allow for that variation to how they can use data. So it is a US-based only thing. But the sheer metrics of the millions of users that are on Twitter versus the billions of users that are on Instagram, as was pointed out in one of the news coverages of it, even a tenth of Instagram users moving over to Thread will be more users than Twitter currently has. It's what Zuckerberg and team does with that. Right now, there's no way of creating a new account outside of connecting your Instagram. I did that because I like making a new account for stuff, and no, you can't. You can only use what you are in Instagram into Thread, which makes it where I like using my name. And there's a young girl that is my doppelganger that is incredibly popular, and she has Instagram my name, where I have my name on everything else. And so I was hoping, on Thread, maybe I can get my name. Nope, I have to move over as my Instagram name. So we have to wait for that iteration to pass, where those names are not allowable. They're pre-used on Thread. Where's the marketing platform to this? It's coming. It has to come. There's also, where's the organization on the feed? You have people that are way too much time on social arguing that I don't want to know about trends. I want to know about my friends. So there's going to be some functionalities, but those functionalities are going to be introduced as new ways of doing it, so that Elon Musk and legal team can be held at bay, that they can't say, you're doing what we do. You're copycatting us. You're stealing our proprietary whatever. Meanwhile, he's the person that fired all the people from Twitter that Zuckerberg hired. So go figure how that works out, right? So the idea of how Thread influences our social ecosystem is yet to be seen, because it's too fresh, too new. And it's still going through the throes of what can we get away with that is like Twitter without it being Twitter, where we don't get sued for doing it. So there's going to be a lot of transitional things to it. But it does lend itself to our eagerness to just jump on board because it's the new boat to jump to. Inherently, as marketers, we have to determine the value proposition of this platform. All of us are just watching the platform right now. We have had discussions about how to exploit the Instagram connectivity to it, and how the data is actually getting on Thread, and what ways can we influence that kind of trend stuff. And while there's a fresh new audience, so to speak, in Thread that's open to anything that's coming into their feed because it's new and they want to see what's in there. So we're going to get a lot of eyes on what you do right now if you can get into Thread. And that's really the nut to crack right now. Is as marketers, we're the ones that try to figure out how to break the system. What is allowed and not allowed, and we're looking at it. So we'll see where it goes to that. And the third, again, conversation out of the changes for this week is the GA4. Not to beat a drum on this as much as I have, but I will, because it is a very live and living thing right now that transition is going through. Not from the idea that we're just going from one platform to the next and we have to get acclimated to the new ways of getting the data, but the actual understanding of what this change means to a lot of people. There is the analogy of a Wild West theme is potentially viable, but it's really more about opportunity, where expansionism of the United States, in the sense of go that way. Okay, literally, we know we were taking away cultures at the time we were doing it, Native American cultures. But the idea of building your own capabilities. GA4 offers a whole new window of opportunity for business intelligence that Universal Analytics helped with, but really was just a platform that had to be adapted in the sense of the data to be used in other things. Now, Google has assimilated the ability to use the data with other data in a much more useful way. Plus, also with the ability to observe everything, then the ability to augment that data to other things that observe everything makes it incredibly valuable for future modeling. You mix that with the perfect storm of AI's progression of usability of data and how you can manipulate or educate an AI function tool with real data. We mentioned the fact don't use fake data because it creates fake results that get carried over to when you start giving it real data. It will make up data for itself. So always use real data when you're creating AI constructs. But the idea that we are now able to use the data in a way that is unstructured, meaning I don't have to create a flow or workflow pathway that has conditional statements algorithmically of on, off, yes, no's, if thens, or anything like that. I can create open construct that says data set, data set, data set, value relationship, interpretation request, and identification of interpretation confidences. It's a progression of a question, very similar to how we deal between ourselves as humans, where we have a progressive question conversation with a person. And you start with questions, and from the answers of those questions, you redefine the next question. And from those answers, you redefine the third question, and so forth and so on, kind of an interrogation profile. The same too with AI. Now we have these data sets that are providing us complete data, whole data. I say that with an asterisk of saying that there's still sampling that goes on with Google unless you're buying 360. But all in all, you have all these data configurations. If anybody's worked with Zapier or if then that or Pabbly or anything, you are given the capability of taking two disparate softwares, defining data fields of one and the data fields of the other, and how they can be connected based on the labeling of this data set versus the labeling on that data set. And it gets very restrictive because it's not so much that the data sets can't be redefined as it is what's available to you to identify and what's available to you for you to use. That restrictiveness is different than a pure API, which is then defined by all of the options available, made presented, I should say, to all the options of how you'd want to use it. So from the idea of these data sets being, for a better way of saying unstructured, which is not a true definition of the word unstructured, but having them in their entirety, you're able to create correlations by simply picking out things and seeing if there's a relevancy to this. And I used the example last week. I'll use the same example this week, weather. We know weather affects purchase decision. We know weather at the origin of the purchaser and the weather at the destination they're interested in. Affects their decision model. That decision model impact has certain definable factors. Booking window, discovery versus education versus acquisition, and also value propositions that get defined in the interaction. As it by not just the weather, but the context of their travel, the monies that they're going to spend. There's variables to this, but these are all defined numbers that can be put together, that instead of creating a logic string, if thens and ors and so forth I just mentioned, you allow it to be open-ended, unstructured. That says, here's this data, here's this data, here's this data, here's weather data, here's your engagement data, here's the demographic data. Given current data of all three of those, can we answer the following questions? When are they looking? Well, we have that as a data point. Is weather of the weather for that data point of interest factor based on arrival? Is it a weather factor on the basis of discovery? These ways can be now done in how you structure a prompt with an AI. All of this is in reference to GA4 right now, right? GA4 right now, the first level that's being done for most people is translating GA4's data the way they used to look at UA data. That's the first abatement to what GA4 data is being used for. How much does it look the same? So I don't lose myself in the continuity of what I used to look at and use as metrics to what I now have and use as metrics. That's soon to get past that point. And people are going to begin like, well, now that I have this data, what other ways should I look at this data? What other data should I look at? That's the next evolution of what GA4 will be. If you're not thinking in those terms now, while you're going into budgeting season, of allocating time and money towards the expansion of your data capabilities, GA4 capabilities, you should. It should be a value proposition either in your marketing or in your operations or in your expense categories of capital improvement. I wouldn't say capital improvement. To expand on what you're using data for and how you're aggregating data. If you're simply appeased by the fact that the transition didn't harm how you're seeing data for the most part, you're still understood, it's close enough in translation, you're still using session-based protocols for referencing compared to session-based protocols from UA. It's different but similar. And you let it go and put it back on the shelf saying, okay, we're fine. We weathered that storm. No worry. I don't know what you're talking about, Lauren. We're fine. We're getting the same data. But you're driving a Maserati to the grocery store. It will bring the groceries, a few of them, but you could do so much more with it if you actually knew what the car was built for. And that's where the GA4 perspective comes in, evaluating the future use of GA4. And that's going to be a competitive edge difference between you and your competitor. Who does that first? Who does it better if you both are doing it? Because the interpretation of the data that is now available and usable in combination and definable by AI will fundamentally change the perspective of how you use and function with data from a reactive, forensic data source of comparative things that have happened to scooping that all up, using it, and evaluating how it can be used for decision modeling in the future. That is the big difference. So those are the things about this week that I was wanting to make sure of. I want to hit some news items also because they were a factor into this week of what happened, in addition to future tense of things, just to throw out some balls up as to things to consider. So it seems almost hand in hand expected that any high demand holiday is going to generate the perfunctory news coverage of meltdowns and problems. The airlines took a poop again. Lots of factors, you can say, lots of variables and so forth. I've stopped giving airlines a pass on this a year ago when it first happened. The first time this happened during the tsunami revenge travel demand, the first summer we were allowed to travel, I understood. They downsized, they retired a lot of the pilots, they didn't invest into their infrastructure. They really were just making sure that they sustained, even though they got billions of buyout dollars from the US that mysteriously just went into their coffers and not to anything that improved the situations. And weren't held accountable for paying any of it back. It was just, here's some free money. Please don't go out of business. Anyways, that was their mea culpa from me. Then came the Thanksgiving meltdown, the Christmas meltdown. And just pick an airline, whether it was Southwest, whether it was Delta, whether it's now United, American Airlines, whatever it is. And of course, you have the weather considerations, you have the lack of mechanicals, you have the infrastructure breakdown of notifying crews how to move. And so there's always the reasons. It's not that there isn't reasons these things happen. It's not like they want to have these things fail. But it's a very big indication as to the fact that if you kick your technology updating down the road, kick the can down the road, if you ignore the things that tell you that you need to think forward of the problem to solve the future problem, and just think that I can resolve the issue right now, it'll quiet down, hopefully this stuff won't happen again. This is the examples that it doesn't work that way. This is the examples that things are wrong. It also brings to the example that airlines hub and spoke system has its major flaws when it comes to these things. It ripple effects stuff. And it doesn't mean that the solution the Southwest has of direct to direct to direct has any immediate, everything has a flaw to it. There's no perfect solution. There's a combination of solutions, and whether you can adapt between those solutions is the key element to this. But again, this July 4th, for all the reasons that they said in the news, tons of cancellations, delays, and so forth. Okay, that's the reality of it. The impact from my marketing perspective is that this is embedding itself into the American psyche right now as to something to be prepared for. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, excuse me. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. People are coming prepared now. I see in the news covers and articles of things where people actually go to the airport with things they don't need for their trip, as is things that they're going to need if they get stuck at the airport. And also, too, in reverse, if they get stuck at an airport while they're in transit to places. People have gotten savvier about how to find and rebook, which creates its own problem because as one thing gets canceled, the same solution gets presented to as many people, and all the people have the same answer. And if you don't know what that means, is for all the people that uses Waze, there was coverage in the news whenever a highway goes down, Waze says get redirected. All of a sudden, residential neighborhoods have lines of traffic going through the resident because that's what Waze told them to go to get around the accident. So people do follow the same solutions. And I'm not saying we're all lemmings, but we are lemmings. If you ever think you're unique, be in a hurricane and think that you're thinking of a creative way to get out of your area, yeah, you're in line with everybody else that thought creatively they were getting out of the area the same way. The idea is this: there's a numbers issues with all this. And people begin to realize that this is a part of their evaluation process for their travel destination decisions. If flying is the only option for them to get to where they want to go, they plan for it accordingly. The fact that the prices have been what they've been, exceptionally high, but then they taper a little bit, where we build this tolerance up, where they say, whoa, flights are down by 3% compared to last year. Yeah, but last year was 21% higher than the year before. So there's 18% higher than they were 2 years ago, and you're happy with this. Like gas prices. Well, gas prices are down to $3.43, $1.23 less than last year. Yes, but they're $1.50 higher than they were 2 years before that. It's a matter of reference as to how well that impacts. The dollar amount, the real impact of the dollar amount is the person's budget. And the gas prices per gallon, how much travel they have to drive to, their miles per gallon, and the cost of their actual. We've gone through this exercise both on the podcast and the live show of the cost of travel to our guests. Whether you want to put a spin on it that's $1.23 less compared to last year, yes, that does create a different demand because people now can afford more comparatively than last year for just taking that one item in comparison. But everything else is also expensive. Their cost of food the entire year between last year and now for them to buy groceries, the cost of all the things that they have to do, their rent going up, their electric going up, their insurance is going up, so forth and so on. So even though you can make the comparison that gas is comparatively less than it was the year before, the dilution of their value of income, because their income hadn't jumped up as the same levels that everything else cost-wise has gone up, inflation, means that they have less to spend, even though there's less required of them to spend. Gas car price. So it's a matter of proportions and metrics. How much money do they have allocated to their budget for travel? That's the number that's the most important, not whether or not perspective-wise the prices are in a better or lesser point. And airlines have failed in their value proposition for all the things that they keep doing wrong. Now, strangely, the best thing for airlines right now, since they're not going to change their ways, they're not going to change their infrastructure, every airline has touted the same issue as before. And that was that our system hasn't been updated. We're going to be updating our system. And everybody goes through that process. Southwest Airlines, American Airlines, we're updating our internal system, so forth and so on. It seems to me they all should have updated their systems the minute the first airline had a problem with their system, because all of them know what each other are doing. And they're like, whoa, if that happened with Southwest, we have the same crappy system they do. We should update it now before we have the same problem they do. Nope, did not learn that lesson, or at least whoever was pitching it didn't get it sold to the people that write the checks. And they said, well, we haven't had a problem yet. And maybe there was other issues with Southwest we don't know about. Let's not jump the gun and spend all this money. Let's just wait and see if we're okay until we can figure it into our budget. And of course, that's just kicking down the can. Nobody's going to figure it into their budget. Just ask anybody that does budgets. They don't want to be the one that gets the music stops and they're holding the bag of poop that they have to put it in their budget until it happens. And now they say the same thing the Southwest said. Oh, well, our infrastructure's failed. We're investing in improvements, which you could have done a year earlier had you taken your own better advice and done it. As you see, I'm a little bitter about the idea. The best thing for airlines right now is that we get past this revenge travel. There was a big estimate, and I was on board with the idea that we weren't going to see the same demand cycles for summer, that people had gotten past the revenge travel. They had gotten past the craving to do it. The unaccounted for component to that, and me included, was the fact that people are just fed up with the constant increasing in costs. And while it's the old adage, it was better to have, the best time to have planted a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. That's the same adage people are using in travel. It would have been better to travel when it was cheaper, but the next best time to travel is now. So knowing that everything seems to be going up in price, that means the price right now is the cheaper price than it will be 6 months from now. So let's do it now. And that's what a lot of people did for summer, is they said, while we still can do this at the prices that we're getting, let's do our travel. And that's where we've seen these demand cycles continue on. As an industry, as a for-profit industry, hospitality and hotels in particular, are looking at this as like, great, let's not worry about investing into our properties and displace business. Let's just keep reading high rates right now for a product that's getting worn down. Forget about customer sentiment and customer scores and customer values and customer reviews. They can eat it. We're just going to keep cashing in the check for our high rates. And then when it finally does eventually slow down, which everybody says is going to happen, then we'll take the time and not displace as much business and invest into it. Problem is, they won't do it. They're going to say, well, now's the time for us to lock down the hatches and not spend money. So we're just going to hang on to our war chest here and weather the storm. And then what's going to happen? Demand's going to come back and they're going to say, well, we don't want to displace any business right now. We'll just keep running with the same worn down product with high rates, because we're already in that cycle from the last time this happened. So we're going to see a continual erosion of quality and customer satisfaction. We have built-in excuses. Oh, we can't hire all the people we want to hire. The people aren't wanting to work for what we were asking them to do anymore. Granted, they can solve that problem too, but they don't. The idea is that as a society, we listen to excuses and move on. We don't take the time to actually understand why the problem persists with some of these places. We don't always travel, so we don't always keep up with travel. We in the industry keep up with the travel and the demands on travel. But we see the same story. History repeats itself, destined to repeat itself, because we don't learn from it. And so we have this cycle of how our industry runs. And right now we have the excuses, and people, they deal with the July 4th fiascos. Flights are this, hotels are so expensive, the weather's terrible, clouds, so forth and so on. But then once we're done with our travel, and we're not worried about travel until maybe Christmas, it's out of mind. As a matter of fact, we probably sit back smugly and watch other people that are having travel issues going, I'm glad I didn't decide to travel for Labor Day or Thanksgiving or Halloween, knowing that they're going to have to jump right into that pile of poop come the time that they do decide to travel. So that kind of happened this week. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox of why air travel is such a pain in the butt. And also the reason why travelers are traveling regardless of the cost. They see this is, if not now, it's only going to be more expensive later. I do want to bring up one question, and I would love feedback from people. Again, you can email me always at lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com, or you can join and add audio to hdm.news/talkback. You can join and give feedback there as well. So I believe this is a dormant giant of potential influence on our business. There's a writer's strike going on. And the last time we suffered through this, there was a gap point in new programming that came up because of it. And it's already been said through the writer's strike that is going on, and the potential of an actor's strike, which would affect movies as well and so forth, that there is going to be a gap in the fall and winter. Recurring shows that we're going to be coming back in the next season aren't, which means that there is a lot of rerun playbacks and so forth. And for people that have already binge watched or watched them all, other than let's go back and watch a few of them, they're going to be looking for alternate entertainment, is what I'm saying. they're going to look at it and say, well, the shows that we usually watch at night are not going to be there. They're going to be looking for other things. One, I think in a positive way, this might influence OTT advertising into alternate channels. There's certain channels that are well positioned for the rerun world, the Tubies of the world and the Plutos of the world. They already have a variety of sources out there that do a lot of old reruns that are in syndication for reruns. And a lot of the mainstays, a lot of the Paramounts and the Disneys and so forth are going to rely upon their catalog library of things to continue to play. They might pull some stuff out they haven't put into rotation in a while just to keep the subscription base running. But you might have a lot of people go and say, my show, the reason why I paid for that extra platform isn't there. So I'm just going to pause it for now. And then when the program goes back or see a program that I like, I'll go over and jump. And we knew there's a lot of brand apathy to this. We know people shift between Netflix to Hulu to Paramount to Peacock, whatever, depending upon the program that they like to watch. Well, that's going to be influenced by this writers' strike that's been going on, and potentially it's going to be influenced by the Actors Guild potentially joining that strike. Who's to say if that will or won't happen? But the idea is that it's going to change the routines of people come the latter part of this year. We're in the hospitality business, so how is that going to affect us? What should it do? One, it's going to affect our marketing strategies because certain audiences that would be in certain spaces may not be in certain spaces. This is going to push people into social media more because they have an interest in keeping distracted. We've turned into a mass consumption society for media. And if you don't have your programs to watch, you're going to want to watch something else because you're already patterned into that behavior. What's going to translate to that? Are they going to find alternates, or are they going to go over and find replacements? That's to be seen. And it could be optimistic for some people in the sense of, especially businesses, especially for this time of year. Let's make a pseudo example of leaf season coming up in the Northeast. Starts somewhere around mid-September, runs strong through mid-October-ish. Maybe a lot of people don't do that because it doesn't work into their scheduling of what they do in a normal daily routine. But now with the disruption of their daily routines, they might consider, it's like, let's get the family out. Let's go do something. Maybe this is the time to really lean into hotels in that market that benefit from that into an early campaign. Just asking. Think about whether this has any merit in your mind as to whether or not this is something that's like, yeah, that's an interesting idea. Maybe it does have an impact, or it won't affect us, or what have you. It might create inspiration for people to say, screw it, let's just go and take a trip. Why not? Let's take advantage of the fact that none of us are really doing what we normally do. Let's go do something different. Who knows? There's going to be lots of ripples, I think, to how this gets translated by people. And it'll be interesting to find out how that works for some when it comes to the impact on people's decision modeling and variances of what they do or don't do kind of stuff. So, well, there you have it. That is my discussions of anything changed for you this week. We talked about the conferences from the past couple of weeks, whether it changed anything you're planning on doing. We talked about the introduction of the new platform Thread. We talked about GA4's continued use now that UA is done and did. We talked about in the news the air travel problems that consistently come back on high demand holidays. We talked about travelers traveling regardless of the cost. That's not just no longer a definition of revenge travel, but really just get it while the prices are the current ones, because they're probably going to go up anyway. And then we talked about the potential impact of things that are in the news, like the strikes of the Writers Guild and so forth, and people's consumable entertainment, and whether that will affect our demand to our market. So with that, thank you so much for watching us, whether it be on our TV station, on Google TV, Apple TV, Amazon TV, Samsung, Roku, whatever. If you're watching us simulcasted on social media, Facebook, we're on multiple pages, YouTube, multiple pages, LinkedIn on one, which is my profile, Twitter, one, which we'll see if Thread gives us that opportunity to do, and then Twitch if you're on the Entertainment Council's PS5 and Xbox and so forth. So my name is Lauren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time, and we look forward to talking to you next week.